Good afternoon. My name is Yodi Marango. I'm one of the biotech analysts at Roth Capital, and thank you for joining our session today. It's a fireside chat with Aimmune Therapeutics. Very happy to have here Eric Bjerkholt, CFO from Aimmune, and Andrew Oxtoby, Chief Commercial Officer, newly joined the company. Aimmune has some very interesting news this morning. Much awaited news. They have a phase 3, a BLA-ready treatment for food allergy, specifically peanut allergy. We have followed them for some time at Roth Capital, and they are one of our covered companies. This morning, they just announced news on the regulatory process for AR101, which is their therapeutic for peanut allergy, and we will discuss that together with some of the regulatory issues and expectations around it. And then later we'll get a little bit into the commercial considerations for what this therapy is, what it could do, where it could fit in the market of peanut allergy, and maybe even what is that market. We'll do all of that in about 20 minutes. So thank you for joining us. I will first let one or the two guests, or maybe both of them, to just introduce very briefly the concept of what AR101 is, the agent that we are discussing.
Thank you, Yodi, and thank you to Roth for inviting us to participate in your fantastic conference. Before I answer your question, let me note that we will be making forward-looking statements today, so please refer to our regulatory filings for the risk factors. So AR101 is an oral immunotherapy treatment, and the goal is to retrain the immune system such that a patient who cannot tolerate peanuts today after a period of time on therapy can tolerate a significant amount of peanuts, thus reducing the risk of reaction to an accidental exposure to peanuts. In our PALISADE phase 3 trials, the median tolerated dose at entry was 10 milligrams, about a 30th of a peanut, and after a year of therapy, in the Exit Food Challenge, the median tolerated dose was 1,000 milligrams, so a full 100-fold increase in the amount of peanut that could be tolerated, thus we think providing a very significant level of protection against accidental exposures.
So, Eric, the regulatory side now, where the phase 3 leaves off and where the history of Aimmune continues, has been a focus for investors for the last year, partly in due because there were several product candidates heading into the FDA. There was one competitor that has gone through their own narrative and their interaction with the FDA and the outcome. So with this as the focus, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time to put in context the news that you announced this morning about moving forward with a review.
Thank you. So this morning we announced that the FDA has accepted our BLA filing for review. It's terrific news for the company, an important milestone. And we also announced that the FDA expects to complete the review by the end of January of next year. And so we are now preparing to help the FDA to get through the review process as expeditiously as possible by answering questions, etc., in a timely manner. They also told us that they expect to have an AdCom sometime later this year without specifying when that AdCom would be, so we are very busy preparing for that AdCom. We have terrific advisors helping us, and we will have several mock panels before an eventual AdCom.
And that should be an interesting panel because this is effectively a first-in-class, so to speak. This market has not really truly been diligenced before by the FDA much, and by investors too. And so you are providing a path or a reason for all of them to look into this. The reason that I wanted to really discuss the FDA review is that there were multiple different ways in which the filing could have happened, and most investors are experienced at looking at biotechnology drugs, agents, assets, going through the typical PDUFA pathway. And so one of the points of interest or points of discussion in the last few months has been how the AR101 is submitted to the FDA and how it is reviewed. And so as it has moved forward and it has been accepted and now you know the timing for review, I just wanted to touch briefly on, are there any tangible differences on whether this was a PDUFA review with a specific date or whether, does it make any difference at all, the way in which it has been submitted and accepted?
Not really, with one potential exception, which is that typically with a PDUFA product, if you have breakthrough therapy designation, which we do, the file gets reviewed with priority review, which is effectively an 8-month review, so 2 months for the file to get accepted and then 6 months review timeline. In our case, because the FDA has determined that all allergenic products are exempt from PDUFA, we don't automatically get that, and so that's why it's really up to a 12-month review from filing as opposed to the more expedited 8-month review. But we are still in discussions with the FDA around that because we believe that with breakthrough therapy designation, the opportunity for a more expedited review should still be there.
And this seems to be something that is applying and would apply to anybody in the area or in the class or in the indication, the treatment under not under PDUFA, sort of treatment as an extract as opposed to an actual agent. It seems that it will be universal for peanut allergy or food allergy.
Yeah, it's new territory in that non-PDUFA products have not previously had breakthrough therapy designation, and so there hasn't been anybody to test what the review timeline really should be. On the other hand, every breakthrough therapy designation product before us have been reviewed on a more expedited basis. So that's kind of the give and take. And at the end of the day, for us, the most important is to work with the FDA to get an expeditious review as possible, one way or another.
Good. And so now the process has started, and you are looking to a potential launch next spring, at the start of the year, as soon as you would hear back from the FDA, depending on the answer. So let's move a little bit, because we only have so many minutes, on commercial preparations. And now, Andrew, you're on board. Let's perhaps discuss it in an atypical way. What is the typical patient out there in the market that you think would be the ideal candidate for AR101? And again, not for a trial, but in the market.
Yeah. So I came on about 2 months ago, and even though Eric has said we may well have a 12-month review cycle, which would mean us launching at the beginning of next year, we're building an organization to launch this drug as early as the end of Q3, beginning of Q4. So as we do that, we start thinking about what is the organization that we need, and what is the infrastructure that needs to be in place at the allergist office to help support patients as they go through this treatment. So to answer your question on who the right patient is, so patients that undergo AR101 go through a 6-month dose escalation process. They start at a 3 milligram dose, and they're escalated up to a therapeutic dose of 300 milligrams. And so during that intervening 6-month period, there's every 2 weeks a visit to the doctor's office to get the next dose in the dose escalation process. And so certainly the ideal patient is somebody that both the patient and the parent or caregiver needs to understand what that process looks like, needs to understand that they will go in, get the initial dose under supervision of the allergist, and then it will be up to the patient or caregiver to ensure that the patient gets that dose every evening as part of the evening meal in that intervening 2-week period before they go back to the allergist's office. And so understanding that process, we think, is important. And then after the 6-month dose escalation period, they then go on to a daily therapeutic dose of 300 milligrams.
So then looking at the profile of that typical patient, and this is, in the end, peanut allergy is mostly, if you're just looking at the distribution of who needs therapy, is mostly a pediatric, perhaps someone adolescent therapy, and then in the older age groups, we don't lose those people having the need, but at a certain point, people, I wouldn't say get comfortable, but perhaps they learn how to live with their allergy better, whereas the kids is truly the focus of the market. Is that fair?
Well, so the indication, we expect the label to be for patients ages 4 to 17. And peanut allergy is distinct from many other food allergies in that the vast majority of patients don't outgrow the allergy. So about 80% the allergy persists into adulthood after usually being diagnosed as a child. And so getting treatment when you're a child and then continuing with that treatment moving forward means that you're protected from a parent perspective. It means your child is protected when you go to a birthday party or when you're away from home without the watchful eye and the help of the parent. And then obviously they have that protection moving forward, assuming they keep taking the dose. One of the things that we're still evaluating is that if you look at allergy shots, so today there's injections that are given for environmental allergies like pollen and ragweed and things like that. About 50% of the patients that undergo that treatment for about 3 years achieve some form of remission where they're effectively desensitized to the allergy. For those that are going through a similar therapy for bee pollen, it's about 5 years. About 50% of the patients achieve that remission. So for peanut allergy, for oral immunotherapy with AR101, we will evaluate that. We don't know what that looks like yet, but certainly given those analogs I've just mentioned, that's something that we'll be taking a look at as we get more and more data.
Yeah, and that's a very important point about immunotherapies in general and then oral immunotherapy, in that the end point, as it has been defined by the FDA and as what we saw in your phase 3 study and others historically but also recently, the end point has been desensitization to a very specific dose of the allergen, of the offending antigen. However, the true holy grail in the field is what we call sustained desensitization, which is then the long term. After you stop therapy, are you still reactive to peanut? And that should be a very interesting answer to have for the future. But, like you said, everything points to oral therapy truly being the stronger driver of sustained desensitization. If we zoom out now from that typical patient onto the market at large, you internally in your company, how are you defining the market? What are the estimates of what is conservative, how much the market could expand, and the like? You had some very interesting and I would say provocative data at the analyst event in New York City based on chart reviews. So tell us a little bit about the size there.
So we'll talk about it both from a patient perspective and then from a sort of an allergy community perspective. So from a patient perspective, there are about 1.6 million children between the ages of 4 and 17 that suffer from peanut allergy in the United States. About 1.25 million of them are diagnosed and actively managed by allergists. And about 80% of those patients also suffer from other conditions, so either asthma or eczema or other food allergies. And so these are patients that today, even though for peanut allergy there is no treatment available other than avoidance of peanuts, many of them are in the allergist's office on a regular basis for the other conditions that they're suffering with. There are about 5,000 allergists in the United States, which is a pretty concentrated subspecialty of medicine. By contrast, there's about 100,000 pediatricians, there's 350,000 primary care physicians. And the reason this is important is because it allows a relatively small biotech such as Aimmune to be able to commercialize this ourselves. And so many companies get to our size and they need to partner with a larger company to provide some commercial infrastructure or look to get acquired. In our case, and this was one of the things that was attractive to me about joining the company, we're able to build a commercial footprint of somewhere between 80 and 120 field representatives and be able to effectively work with and target that allergist community. Because those 5,000 allergists also tend to practice in clusters, in clinics, and so we think we can very adequately cover the allergist community to be able to at least provide that option for the vast majority of patients that are suffering from the peanut allergy today.
So those are very interesting, promising numbers, and quite impressive from a market standpoint and the potential of that market. But let me challenge that a little bit. Just looking historically at immunotherapy in peanut allergy, and we have not had an actual product. What we have seen is that oral immunotherapy, in a generic fashion, has been used in the past. It was effective, but that was pretty much allergists taking a chance, grinding their own peanuts into powder, and designing their own protocol. So there was no one unified protocol, and that is part of the value and the general advance of AR101, is having a standardized way of doing that. But looking at how much that generic oral therapy had taken hold of that market in the past, what makes you optimistic about the future now that you have a branded, FDA-approved product? Is that the secret, just having an actual label?
So it's a great question. So as Jotin mentioned, today you've got somewhere in the order of about 100 clinics that are out there practicing what we call this homebrew version of oral immunotherapy, where they're using essentially grocery store bought products to try and desensitize the patient. This can be problematic for a couple of reasons, and one of the main reasons is that grocery store bought peanut products tend to be highly variable in the amount of allergenic content that they have. And so there are certain allergens within the peanut that are more important than others in terms of causing allergic reactions, and we're working with the FDA to characterize precisely the allergenic fingerprint of our products so that we can consistently provide that same allergenic fingerprint every single dose. So both in terms of the amount of the product that the patient takes, but also in terms of the allergen content of that product. Given that our first starting dose, in fact even before the 3 milligram dose is given, we do a first day challenge which involves a 0.5 milligram dose. Now that is 1/600th of a peanut. And I would challenge the ability of anybody to grind up a peanut or take some peanut butter and consistently and accurately make fractions of a peanut over time. And the ramification of this is that once you get to a point where the patient is taking larger and larger amounts, first of all, you run the risk of giving them more of the allergen than you think you are, and so you could create a reaction. The other, perhaps almost more sinister ramification is that you could actually be giving them less, and so you think that they're protected to a certain level against the allergen, but in reality they aren't, and so they go off into society thinking that they can get some sort of accidental exposure potentially, and they're actually not protected because the amount of allergen they've been taking isn't sufficient. So yes, we're going to be coming forward with an FDA-approved product, but it's the nature of that product and the consistency and the protection that it affords which is attractive. And so we know from talking to allergists that even though there's only 100 of those 5,000 allergists that are doing this homebrew today, we know that about 75% have said that given if this were approved as an option, this is something that they would like to be able to make available to their patients. Clearly there's some liability concerns as well of offering an off-label solution, and so this allows them to have something that's FDA approved and a consistent treatment for their patients potentially.
And there was interesting data at the college meeting, not at Quad AI, last November, where I don't think it was Aimmune generated data. I think it was investigator data where they showed that an analysis of all peanut products out there which are used for the generic oral therapy showed a variance of 20 to 100. It was a large multiple of difference in their peanut content, and so then where does it leave you when you're trying to design a very specific titration for a patient that is allergic? So that makes a very big difference. How, just in the last minute or two, how should we think about the value of AR101 in the market as investors start to diligence the potential commercial value and pricing? It is probably very early to start talking about that, but how should we start thinking about, well, the savings to the system or perhaps comparison to another therapy to begin our diligence on our side about the potential pricing?
Well, so we won't be providing any specific pricing guidance until launch, which I think is a pretty consistent practice with other pharmaceutical launches. We've had discussions with payers, and certainly they see the value and they realize the unmet need that's out there associated with this. So besides the value that they see to the patient and the parent in terms of peace of mind and knowing that there's some protection from accidental exposure, there's also potentially an emerging value story. So if you are a patient with peanut allergy today in the United States, there is a 1 in 4 chance that in any given year you will end up in the emergency room because of your peanut allergy. And so to the extent that we'll be able to show data which potentially reduces the frequency of emergency room visits by patients, there's some potential cost offset there for the payers. So we're working through that model to see what that looks like.
Understood. I will pause because I see the light blinking and see if the audience has any questions for the last few minutes.
The question is, any plans for follow-on indications in other allergies? Yes, absolutely. We filed an IND for our egg program late last year, and the FDA has given us the thumbs up to launch that trial, and so we expect to enroll the first patient in a randomized phase 2 trial by the middle of this year. And then we're also very interested in tree nuts. As most of you probably know, peanuts are not nuts, they're legumes. But tree nuts is another huge problem, and we're very keen to see if we can develop a multi-nut treatment to potentially desensitize against the majority of tree nuts as one product. So we'll be trying to figure out how to do that over the next few quarters, and that could be the third program. And then we're also interested in milk allergy as a fourth program. So the question is that a number of different companies have been tripped up by CMC issues through the review process. So our manufacturing process has been very stable for many, many years, and because of our breakthrough therapy designation, we have very close interactions with the FDA, and so our analytical methods, manufacturing processes have all been developed with a lot of input and interactions with the FDA. So that gives us a lot of confidence, but we're also preparing very thoroughly for inspections, which we know will happen as part of the review process. Just like for the outcome, we've had several mock inspections already, and we'll be ready for the agency when they decide to inspect our manufacturing processes.
And I suppose it's only fair to add this comment in this particular space. I don't think it was several companies; it was only one that tripped up on that issue. Yeah. But I guess it's sort of 50% of the companies in the space. So in that regard, that we should pay attention. All right. Well, we'll wrap this up, and I hope that you do take a chance to speak to Eric and Andrew, perhaps even outside, or request a meeting, because after today's news about the acceptance of the filing, this gives the story a defined window through which you will be commercial, potentially. So, looking forward to hearing great news.
Thank you all for your interest.